Welcome to Cultural Economy in the Kitchen, the podcast from the Journal of Cultural Economies Editorial Collective. I'm Dr. Addie McGowan, a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Edinburgh and reviews and online content editor for the journal.
And I'm Professor Philip Roscoe, Professor of Management at the University of St Andrews Business School. And I'm co-editor-in-chief of the JCE. Today is all about the cultural economies of the tech bros, from Peter Thiel to Elon Musk.
To explore this, we welcome two recent and highly popular contributors to the JCE, Dr. Carla Ibled and Dr. Dominik Zelinski. We'll first discuss Carla's article, Founder as Victim, Founder as God, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and the Two Bodies of the Entrepreneur.
And then we'll turn the conversation to Dominik's piece, To the Moon, Elon Musk, Dogecoin, and the Political Economy of Charismatic Leadership.
And we apologize in advance for so much Musk.
Yeah, there's going to be definitely a musky kind of aroma to this episode, but I think you'll wash it out of your clothes afterwards. Thanks for joining. Despite the tech bros, let's introduce our guests. Carla, can you please introduce yourself and tell us where you're joining from?
Yes. So I'm Dr. Carla Ibled. I'm Career Development Fellow in International Political Economy at University of Durham. But I'm joining you from Glasgow, which is, quite far away from Durham. But quite close to you, I think. So,
Yeah.
And what have you been cooking in the kitchen recently? I guess you get a Durham choice or a Glasgow choice now, the local favourites.
I'm a bit boring on this level because basically I have a 2.5-year-old and my culinary ambition have been completely crushed to the ground. So at the moment, the only thing I'm doing is mass roasting some chestnuts because she loves it. So yeah, but otherwise when people come and visit, I give them some haggis because apparently that's a specialty. But
Nice.
French people are really horrified. I think there was some kind of advertising campaign when my parents were kids, and really they are horrified by the idea of haggis. So yeah.
Well, you can single-handedly change their mind.
Yeah, I hope.
And so, Dominik, on to you.
Yeah.
Can you introduce yourself and say where you're joining us from?
Yeah, I'm Dominik Zelinski. I'm working as a senior research fellow at the Institute for Sociology at Slovak Academy of Sciences, and I'm joining you from Bratislava. But I also have a Scottish connection. I did my PhD at the University of Edinburgh, and I loved haggis actually at that point. Surprisingly, it's actually pretty similar to some of the national dishes in Slovakia or in Central Eastern Europe. So I wasn't all that surprised, I have to say.
Nice. I like haggis too, I have to admit. So besides haggis, what have you been cooking lately?
Well, I have recently reconstructed a kitchen, so I'm not coming anywhere near it. I really like how clean it looks now. So I'm basically living off the kind of cold food from the grocery shop.
I like the idea of that. Your kind of perfect show kitchen with a little microwave in the corner that you can ping things in.
Yeah, it's a very design piece.
Very, very design piece. That's what you want. Carla, let's get going thinking about your paper, which I think is an absolute cracking paper, and so does everybody else, clearly, because the numbers are spectacular. It's the most downloaded piece of 2025 so far in JC, with very nearly at the 10,000 mark. And I think the reason that's been so successful is, or has generated so much interest, is that this feels very much of the moment. But of course, you've been working on this for years. So tell us a bit about what got you started and why you thought this was worth pursuing.
Yeah, so you're entirely right. So, I've been far too long with those two people because, I think I've been working on them for at least 10 years, so which seems horrifying when I think about it. But, the beginning was unfortunately, nothing really exciting in the sense that they were part of my PhD. So their name came out the first time in supervision discussions with my supervisor at the time, who was Will Davis, who has some kind of flair to find, very influential, horrible people. So in the same way, in our conversation, he told me for the first time about J.D. Vance. And again, that was 10 years ago. So J.D. Vance is also in my PhD following this. But so that's how I started. And basically, I think, he mentioned them. And after I read, I think, one of the lecture from Stanford, founder as victim, founder as God. And I found it absolutely crazy. And I was reading a lot of Lacan at that time. And I just really thought, that was so clearly, there was so much, to say, So so much food for thought in some ways that, it seemed like an evidence to continue working on this. That was the start. And and as you said, it was both one of the difficulty of working about them is the fact that it was 10 years ago and they kept doing crazy stuff. But at the same time, what is kind of interesting is that they always been quite consistent in what they have been saying. And, they have been doing a lot of new crazy shit, but at the same time, they're still very, saying the same things. So, they help me on that ground.
It's almost as if they have a sort of script writer for their crazy shit, that they it's very consistent, isn't it? So these lectures, I've encountered them as well. These are Blake Masters' notes from Peter Thiel's course at Stanford, which is bonkers before we've even started, isn't it? I mean, what do you know about that kind of intellectual history?
Yes, absolutely. So Thiel funded his campaign for, I think, trying to be a senator in Arizona. So it didn't work. But basically the history is that, from what I understand, he took lecture notes of like Thiel's lecture and after published it on his blog, and it became widely popular. And after that, him and Thiel decided to rework some of these lectures to publish 0 to 1. So 0 to 1 is officially, Thiel's book, but it's Blake Masters is a co-author as a note taker in some ways. But what is quite interesting is what didn't make it to the book. And for instance, this lecture, Founders as Victim, Founder as God, hasn't made it to the book, or, in a kind of so shortened version of it remains that you can't really see, all the madness of the initial lecture, which is, goes, to like great lengths in like,
That's the real kind of come on for your paper, is this wonderful quotation at the beginning: founder as victim, founder as God. What is it about the founder? What does founder mean for these people?
Yes, so I guess there's several things. The founder is a kind of mythical entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. There is a kind of aura around the founder. I think there is in the paper, there's a quotation, I think, from a business newspaper where they're like saying, founder are this kind of inherently creative spirits and this kind of a super being that are able to create the startup. There's a kind of mythology around this concept of the founder, but of course the founder also is an allusion to the founding fathers of the United States. So I guess there's always this kind of doubling kind of signification here, where from the beginning I think there's already kind of a political twist to this kind of concept. But yes, so the founder is a hero, the founder is a creator, the founder is a disruptor. And basically what is quite interesting is that especially Thiel with 0 to 1 is part of this kind of management literature about how to become a founder. And in a way, this concept of the founder, you find it of course in their self-narrative, but also in the kind of the discourse of young aspiring entrepreneurs who also want to be founders. So it's kind of an interesting concept.
Yeah, you write that the founder is the perfect model of the ruler in the post-democratic age. What does that mean?
So what is common to both Peter Thiel and to Elon Musk is that they have this kind of dissatisfaction with the status quo, and they think that in a way the founder would be the good ruler because of its disruptive abilities. And also in a way, there's always this kind of belief that in a way the state should be reshaped into a startup. And so who would be a better manager to this future, state startup than a founder? So I guess in their age, especially with Thiel, there's like this notion of a degenerative political realm, and that's the action of the startup founder is there to break the status quo and bring this kind of new order that is kind of shaped on the startup as a model.
Dominik, I can see you're nodding along there. Do chip in if you'd like to.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love the paper, and I love the ideas actually. But I find it very interesting actually from my perspective that this, what you describe as post-democratic element to the founder, to me, there has been a little bit of a shift over the course of the past 20 or so years, if we think about it. Because I remember people like Mark Zuckerberg, saying that Americans love us, that there was this prophetic, active element where these people were acting as somehow the prophets of the future, who also somehow required like this legitimation from the population. The startup, the idea of the startup was also based on the kind of direct relation between the employees and the employer, right? But now I think I feel like there has been some sort of a change where the kind of prophetic figures of fairly disembedded, transgressive founders is finding a new expression in exactly what you're kind of describing as these barons and kings, and that there is something of a stabilization of like going on of this position, which somehow kind of in my view, like transforms from charismatic leaders into more traditional figures, almost like kings of their own realm, who don't really require the people to be actually satisfied with what they do anymore, right?
Right, like they're almost just, they know better than the people would know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I thought the interesting parallel between our paper is the thing that, they still needs, this kind of validation, I guess, that, and they keep, fighting for attention and trying to be present on social media and disrupt and, so.
Well, Elon Musk definitely does.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
Well, and to some extent, I've seen, since the article was published, I think Peter Thiel is continuing with this new thing about the Antichrist. That's his new thing that he's like bringing everywhere. So I guess that's his way of disrupting as well. But
You can get yourself a T-shirt that says "Don't immanentize the catechon." I think that's the slogan that shows you're a real Peter Thiel geek. But I haven't managed to lay my hands on one yet. It's this extraordinary mashup of these really. You talk about the 21st century magicians and the entrepreneur king, and in 0 to 1. I mean, the 0 to 1 is largely kind of mundane. It's a very boring book, apart from the final chapter, which is completely bonkers, and is the one that really talks about the founder. I think maybe that's where this ended up. And he talks about Oedipus, and Oedipus as being the paradigmatic insider, outsider, and he was smart enough to solve the riddle of the Sphinx and all the rest of it. And it, it's just this kind of extraordinary thing that have you not kind of read this play? Isn't the whole point of it that Oedipus can't see? But he talks about Romulus and Remus and all these other very arcane figures. So there's this bizarre sort of mix up between old and new and future and ancient and all the rest.
Yeah, and also that's where that's his way of staging the exceptionality of the founder. So the founder is someone who is both a god but also a monster. And so someone like Romulus is interesting because he's, the founder of Rome, but also killed his brother. And Oedipus is interesting because, again, he solves the Sphinx, riddle, but also, slept with his mother. So he always have like this kind of, he compares basically himself to this kind of double figure. But what is cut from the lecture at Stanford is where in the end he starts imagining the sacrifice of the founder. So he has a whole thing where he's saying like, actually the founder is a scapegoat and people really want to kill the founder. And you can see he's talking about Christ and he's thinking he's Christ. That's basically where this leads us. But so he has a whole thing about the crowds killing the founder and
it's a very subtle reference kind of.
Always.
Right. Exactly. And that kind of, I was struck Yeah, I was struck too, to the Christ comparison by your points about the heroic body and kind of bringing that into the embodiment of these people's beliefs about themselves, and kind of thinking about the limitations of nature, our right for tech solutionism, and kind of entangling themselves and their bodies up in that. If you want to speak a bit more to that.
Yeah, so one of the things, when I started my exploration of Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, of course, very quickly I came across the fact that Peter Thiel was a very important founder of posthumanism, and he was really, really afraid of dying. And there were a lot of wild rumors about him having young people's blood injected. I think nobody really can agree on who started this rumor. I think in the end, it's probably him who kind of lent himself to, but yeah, it's not entirely clear to me. It's not clear he actually did it. But anyway, so he has been funding quite a lot of projects like the Methuselah Foundation. So he basically, says in quite a lot of interview quite early on in quite widely read newspaper and journals. So for instance, in the New Yorker, that his biggest fight is against what he calls the ideology of death. So he's really afraid of dying. And I thought that was an interesting kind of recurrent kind of dimension of his discourse, and the same, to connect it back to the founder, at risk of being killed all the time. So I guess, that's where I connected it to this kind of, aspiration to incarnate this kind of, immortal figure of like power, and how, in order to do that, they try to recreate the body of a hero. So in his case, a body that doesn't die. In the case of Elon Musk, all this thing with Iron Man, that's his big kind of.
It's also
connection.
I find it very interesting from like a systematic perspective, from looking at what kind of order they imagine, is that on the one hand, right, there is this idea of creative destruction that is very inherent to how people like Thiel or Musk, I think, understand the economy. Which takes into account that things have to end in order to progress. And at the same time, like there is this resistance for kind of letting go, is that we can be disrupted forever. And I find that to be a very interesting kind of paradox in how they imagine the future and the social order.
Yeah, and also, increasingly I'm interested in, all this thing that is also so connected, but I don't really talk about it in the piece, but about fertility. They have all this thing. How does their aspiration to live forever live with, the fact that they want to multiply children, and I guess they want to live forever through their children as well, but at the same time it's kind of, connected with, at the same time, this like incredible kind of self kind of love that means that they just don't want to let it go. They want to stay here forever.
Yeah, but there should be also, I think, added, if I may, just for 1 second, that you're totally right with this fertility and also the population discourses, which Musk has been so involved, especially for. But I mean, there is also a deep kind of far right threat to that, because it's only a particular color kind of people that should be actively procreating, I find, in the discourse.
Yeah, totally.
So Carla, your argument in this paper, as well as that all these imaginings that we've just been characterizing so well, that these are paranoid, aren't they? They're really laden with all kinds of fears and worries, and you're drawing psychoanalytic concepts from Freud and Lacan to make some of these points. I mean, just as we finish up, talk us through quickly how you might use Lacan to understand Roscoe, Thiel or Freud.
So I think, two examples I give. So for instance, of course, all this thing with Oedipus and transgression leads itself to like discussion about the primal father in Freud. So there's all this story of like the primordial horde, where you have like one overpowerful father who is the representative of the exception, because he keeps for himself all the women. He forbids all his son to access any other women, and in a way, he's like the representative of this kind of figure of incest. And at some point, his son rebelled, decided to kill him, and in a way that struck by guilt afterwards and decide to renounce, for instance, incest and everything, because, they feel too guilty after having killed their father, basically, if I summarize. But so in a way, the social contract is recreated around this murder of, the primordial father. So in a way, still, when he imagines the scapegoat, the founder being a scapegoat that needs to be killed, that will be killed, that's his way of imagining himself as, this new figure around which the future social contract will be reconstructed. And at the same time, that's also why, he needs to fantasize himself as a figure of exception, and maybe as a slightly of a monster, but also as an over-powerful person. So that's one of them. In the case of Lacan, I guess it's more like, kind of tied together, but like to think about this concept of jouissance and how, they are kind of incarnating this kind of, this figure of jouissance that they are trying to reach by trying to reach immortality, but at the same time, as soon as they try to, reach it, actually they are reaching them, or reaching jouissance is basically reaching your own self-destruction in Lacan, and that's what happened to them. And I try to explain that in a way their anxiety is also maybe connected to this, to the fact that they want to incarnate something, this other powerful figure, but cannot really do this, and how, it kind of highlights some kind of fragility in the kind of imaginary figures they constructed for them, I guess.
Oh, and it's wonderful analysis. But just to finish up, I have to ask you the sort of question that we always have to ask critical scholars. I'm a critical scholar as well. So, but do we make things worse by taking these guys seriously? Do we kind of enact those regimes of domination that we're critiquing? Is the general kind of critic question. But should we be worried about this stuff, or is it just balmy?
I guess it's a really good question, and that's also something sometimes I really wonder whether like they're worth it, and they're like saying so crazy things that should we take them seriously? And and in a way I think we do, because again they're taking more and more space politically. They're actively funding neo-reactionary movement. For instance, Musk was not so long ago talking to the rally in London in memory of Charlie Kirk and called for the dissolution of parliament. And so, they are like really actively promoting some very nasty kind of political movements. And also the other reason I think it's important is that in some ways, even if, they seem so outré that it seems kind of strange that we would identify with them, but I still think that there is something surrounding us, which is some kind of a discourse of entrepreneurship, and that's we are kind of, as Foucault famously said, led to maybe consider ourselves as entrepreneurs of ourselves. So the model of entrepreneurship is something that really, surrounds us in some ways. And taking this kind of extreme discourse of entrepreneurship and showing how, internally they don't work, and how in a way they are monstrous discourse, is also a way to like maybe shift another light on this kind of rationality about entrepreneurship, and maybe take some distance with it, and maybe problematize this discourse that is so prevalent around us.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Gosh, so much to think about, and now let's kind of turn the discussion a bit to part 2. Where we're going to speak about Dominik Zelinski's paper, To the Moon, Elon Musk, Dogecoin, and the Political Economy of Charismatic Leadership. Before we get into that, Philip, I'm going to put you on the spot. You're joining us from a borrowed kitchen, right? So where are you today?
Yeah.
And can you share a bit about what you've been cooking in this new space?
Well, I'm currently in a little Airbnb flat in Neckarsteinach on the River Neckar, just outside of Heidelberg in southern Germany, which is, it looks like the front cover of a sort of Penguin Nietzsche that I might have read when I was 16, with all these wonderful wooded hills in the autumn colours. I'm here because I'm spending the semester as an affiliated researcher at the Centre for Apocalyptic and Post-Apocalyptic post-apocalyptic studies in Heidelberg, which is clearly how I have such an interest in all these terrible people we've been talking about. And also, I've been reading a lot of Carla's work. I'm becoming a bit of an Ibled groupie, actually, if it to be honest. So that's why I'm here, and it's really great to have this conversation while I am here. What I'm cooking, well, if you know southern Germany, you'll know there's wonderful cakes and pastries. So I'm not cooking, I'm buying. But in the run up to Christmas, or Stollen and all of those kind of wonderful marzipan things, and there's a wonderful sort of marzipan sugary bread thing and various other things with poppy seeds and hazelnuts and cinnamon and all sorts of delicious stuff. So I'm going to come back like a house.
Nice. Well, maybe you can send some to Dominik in his refurbish progress kitchen so he can have something to eat.
Yeah.
All right. So, Dominik, let's turn the conversation to your piece. It was published last year with the JCE, and it's still gaining lots of attention, of course. And this is such an interesting topic. So thanks for being here today. And also, like Carla, it seems like you've been interested in the topic of charismatic leadership for a while now, too. Puns aside and jokes aside about what drew you to charismatic leadership, what did? What made you interested in this?
Well, yeah, so I'm not really somebody who actually came to like economic sociology. First, I started as a cultural sociologist, and I still do the work on that topic. And I did my PhD on, intellectuals and on philosophers who worked in Czechoslovakia before 1989, and who were kind of very often fired from universities, and they would found basically kind of small homemade study groups, and would kind of create circles around them. And at some point, I realized like what I'm actually describing is not really studying philosophy that much, as it's circles of worship concentrated around kind of supposedly extraordinary figures, and that it matches very much what Weber has described as charismatic authority. But because I did it at the University of Edinburgh, and where notoriously is a strong economic sociology department, I came to know people who worked sociologically on economy. And I became, over time, more and more interested in this topic. And then I think it was, 2020, 2021, during the COVID pandemic, people like Elon Musk suddenly grasped the attention of the world with the Dogecoin, with other, like, perhaps you remember this planned match, MMA match between Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg. Yes. And I was doing my postdoc in Denmark, which has a really bad weather, and it's a really depressive country. So I had a lot of time to spend on investment apps and so on. And I started to be very, very interested in how Musk works with money. And because I was reading Weber very closely at that point, I realized like there was a connection in what is going on. And I realized that not many people had written about how charismatic leaders manipulate money or work with money. But that Weber was already very, very clear on how that works, and that basically we can systematize it somehow and relate it to and make sense out of what Elon Musk does on Twitter and how he worked with Dogecoin.
Yeah. And so what are some of those qualities then of charismatic leadership? You know, the paper gets into the kind of tensions that Weber points out, and kind of, can you talk about that in the context of what you're learning about Musk? Yeah.
Well, charismatic leadership doesn't really have stable characteristics. It's all in the phenomenology of the perception of the leader. It's all in the kind of social organization that emerges around them. But basically, it's a form of authority, of power that emerges out of spontaneous recognition that somebody is extraordinary. but it doesn't really have to do with objectively extraordinary qualities that one has. And it's often that charismatic leadership comes with times of extraordinary crisis in society, and then indeed develops them further, and it undoes the structures, the social structures that were in place before. And with Musk and Dogecoin, I found it very interesting that Weber already was writing about the relation that charismatic leaders have with money, and the fact that they actually abhor money. They tend to not be particularly fans of just making money, but they need to somehow to transform it symbolically into a symbolic object. And I was thinking, like, that is actually what is going on. That for Musk, for Thiel, for people like that, money is not really, it doesn't really have much worth otherwise than its symbolic worth, than what it makes them able to articulate about the world, about themselves. And I thought that was actually very, very important. And what was also very important was how money became something that tied them to the followers. It's very often that we see this in charismatic relations when basically people enter some sort of new religious movement, like they tend to give everything away or donate everything to the leader. But also the leaders tend to kind of turn this into some sort of a different currency. They give something back. They give something in return. And the way that Musk was working with Dogecoin was had a very similar dynamic, because he was kind of expecting the people invest, but at the same time the way they understood it was that through his proactive tweeting on Twitter, which was still called Twitter, I think, at that time before he bought it, he was returning them the gift through knowledgeably manipulating the price of the cryptocurrency.
So can I jump in? Can we backpedal a little bit, because there's so much here and it's really fascinating. But in your initial kind of discussion of charismatic authority and economics in the paper, you say something like, charismatic authority is quite kind of dismissive of routine and bureaucracy and all of those kind of things. But I mean, what one observes about someone like Elon Musk is that Elon Musk runs factories, and Elon Musk's factories run on kind of Victorian labor principles, and they're like super tailorist. And this is a point that's made in Carla's paper as well. Actually, the kind of suffering of the CEO rubs onto the suffering of the employees. So you've got this kind of simultaneous use of kind of spectacular charismatic authority where, as you say, money has no value apart from that. And at the same time, massive global supply chains, tailorist working practice, industrial production, what have you, on which these fortunes are at least in part based. Mm-hmm. And that to me is a really interesting kind of disjuncture.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but from my perspective, let's think about how Elon Musk is signified in the public discourse. I mean, he's certainly not signified, and he does not perform in a way that would be suggestive of him as being actually the bureaucratic leader of a sustainable system, right? He does portray himself knowledgeably as the disruptor of everything that is old, which might be, at odds. I think I refer to in the paper to somebody like Warren Buffett, right? Yes, who would say like, I would never actually sell my stock because my preferred time to sell is never. I don't like speculation as such. So I think that there is an element to that these two figures basically signify very different types very different imaginaries of what capitalism is. And even though they might not be actually different in practice, they refer to very different veins of public imagination. Warren Buffett is one example, but we also have other boring capitalists like Bill Gates, for example.
Bill Gates. I mean, he's the paradigmatically dull capitalist, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly.
Now in his old age.
Although, I mean, his business has been also fairly disruptive, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But he doesn't choose really, and he's not associated with this kind of chain of symbols within the discourse that will make him into the charismatic leader. But for Musk, that somehow works. And I think that's important for capitalism somehow writ large, is that in order for a system to work, it needs to work culturally. And it has to have this energetic, vital center of ideology that pushes us further, the kind of creative disruption, not only on the structural level, but also on the level of what actually motivates people on affective, cultural, imaginary side. But it also has to have a stabilization, like a stabilizing core with the dull capitalists who simply give the system a kind of longer cultural lifespan, so to say.
And I think that's, and I might be misunderstanding this, so please expand on it. But I really loved then you bringing that into, the kind of swashbuckling entrepreneur, capitalist adventurer, originally as characterizing Silicon Valley, but now routinization of startup culture has kind of become mundane, Silicon Valley and startup culture. So maybe then that's where we are now. So I just find that a really interesting conversation. The Bill Gates that used to be a disruptor is now very routine, and now someone that lays the foreground for someone like Musk to really come in with that charismatic potential of YOLO capitalism.
Yeah, well, I find it really interesting and important that charismatic leaders also don't really, they are supposed to be very individual, extraordinary, unique. But if you actually look at them, they're very similar to one another, right? And they work by blueprints. And people like Musk and others, I mean, for them, Steve Jobs, for example, is the blueprint. Like, he is the charismatic of the Silicon Valley that has been then, whose kind of life has been then reinscribed into biographies, and it's being repeated by other wannabe founders, wannabe charismatic leaders. But basically there is from my perspective, there is a routinization definitely going on. And I find that basically from this prophetic, as I said, like from this initial prophetic stage, we are moving to a more stable position. But perhaps that is also, symptomatic of how capitalism also works. Is that when you're discovering a new field, like the digital space, like you have to have these pioneers who motivate people by example. And then once kind of it's mined out, you need to enter the stabilizing phase.
Yeah, I think that brings me to, I am also a digital ethnographer, so I've done some of that work, and I really loved that was your method for this, to really hang out in these spaces of Twitter and Reddit. And it struck me too, and then reading your analysis, that I believe that ethnography in these digital spaces and like the deep cultural understanding of these subgroups and subcultures is pivotal to understanding and analyzing actually what's going on. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about that experience. What was it like to hang out in these spaces? Did anything surprise you, or did anything not surprise you in your time, the deep time that you spent in these spaces?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was interesting. And I mean, to honestly say, like, COVID was a very perfect moment to do that. I find the digital ethnography these days to kind of acquire an increasing importance, because we see that the digital space is becoming increasingly so, the new space of the civil sphere, a new kind of place where actually movements can emerge. So I think that it will be pretty important. But I don't kind of associate it with like a great I enjoyed it, but I wasn't very surprised with what I found in the end, I have to say.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, thousands and thousands of comments of like, here you go, Elon. It's somewhat a draining experience.
Right. Yeah, and I'm sure, you need some space from that, from the own ethical care of yourself as a researcher, and that is bound to be very important.
I have maybe a question.
Yeah.
Can I was just, really, I really loved your paper, and I was wondering, because it finished, with Saturday Night Live. I was wondering, what was the reaction after, Elon Musk was nominated as the head of Doge? Like, what was it a renewed love, or was it, did that start, this relationship again? Because in the way you narrate it, it comes to an end with what happened on the show.
I was frankly surprised. That the Doge actually was formed. When I was writing the paper, I couldn't really imagine, and I bet that is also a more general experience of Elon Musk's short time in the government. But I mean, obviously there was a certain invigoration of the enthusiasm. But I think that also Elon Musk somehow fell out at this point of the picture, which is interesting for me, for example, from the perspective of charisma theory. And it somehow makes sense that he's somebody who I think very much wishes to maintain this charismatic status. And I think that is very hard when you're competing with another charismatic leader, which is Donald Trump, right? And we have seen, I think, in the beginning of the Trump regime in the US, how other formerly or currently charismatic leaders of the big tech industry basically called or kind of bowed to Donald Trump, and how, I mean, for me, I understand that there's a moment of giving up on charisma for them, because you have to recognize somebody else's extraordinariness. I think Musk simply was not able or is not cut out of the material to become a bureaucrat or become a kind of vassal symbolically to Trump. So I think that his position is politically and power-wise very problematic. But it was amazing what they kind of pulled through, with the Doge.
Yeah, it's all so fascinating, and it's changing every minute, every day right now. And so I guess with that, I want to kind of wrap up, but to wrap up, I'd like to ask you where this leaves us. Another big question following Philip's lead with Carla. But, where do you hope to see our analysis and understanding of charismatic leadership, which I think the lens that you've given through this paper is a really helpful one for us to kind of practice our understanding of cultural economy, as we move forward. But how do we use this, and what are your hopes for understanding charismatic leadership as we stare down 2026 and what might be ahead for us?
Yeah, I think that it's important to actually get deeper into two things, into the cultural structures and the narratives that basically make up charismatic leadership. And then, because we need that in order to understand the position of these people, of these leaders within the current social and political arrangements, and also really to more in depth explore the political economy, because they are because the way that they govern is touching, on the one hand, on the well-being of employees so deeply within the factories, within the gig economy. At the same time, I mean, it is touching so much on the economic well-being of societies and of countries. I mean, because these people are simply incredibly rich. And I think that charisma has somehow become politically one of the defining elements of the contemporary conjuncture, and the way that it is entangled with economy. We can see that, for example, with Javier Milei, also in Argentina, with Donald Trump himself, because I think it makes it makes more accessible understanding why they take particular economic decisions. I mean, for example, the tariffs of Donald Trump. I mean, to me, there is an element of that is not only a random madness, but there is a logic to what he does. And the logic is not only economic, but it's cultural and it's social. And from my perspective, the view or the perspective of leadership and legitimacy and authority is a very kind of pertinent viewpoint to understand how they work with the economy.
Yeah. Well, that's a fantastic place to end for today. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dominik. Thank you, Carla, for joining us and sharing your work. Two really important papers that we think speak well to each other. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation.
So you've been listening to, or maybe watching, Cultural Economy in the Kitchen from the Journal of Cultural Economy Editorial Collective. Today's episode was produced by C-Ros Cinematics, and you'll find links to the papers at the end of the video if you're watching on YouTube. Don't forget to like, to subscribe, tell your friends, and share.
And don't forget to join us next time for another serving of goodies from our intellectual hot pot. Until then, it's goodbye.